So in a previous video, we talked about using LLMs with AIP logic and how we can construct uh, a prompt, or how can we construct a logic function and have LLM prompts in there. Now, one of the things that we want to quickly do, and once you realize this as your application is getting a lot more complex, is that you want to start to put evaluations. Now, good evaluations for a couple of things. But let's actually go to the docs and see the documentation on evaluations, right? So if you just look for AIP evals, you can start to see there's quite a bit of content here. But specifically, you want to look at why we want to use evals, right? So create test cases and divide evaluation criteria, debug and iterate, improve functions and prompts. But one of the things I want to do now, which I've actually not even really done, is compare different models to your functions. So we're going to do this in a very simple way. Um, what we're going to do is read the documentation and see how this can get applied. Okay, so not to make this complex, let's look at a simple eval. So what I want to do is now I'm going to come to the evaluations, and I haven't set up any tests, so I can start by setting up a test. I'm going to leave the name as default. I'll probably just put in a folder called evals, right? So I'm neatly storing all my evaluation suites. So we don't have any test cases, we don't have any evaluators. So test cases basically would be um, what are the specific things that you want to test, and you can develop a couple of them manually, or you can get it from an object set. And evaluators are what are the functions you want to apply to these test cases to then get some output. And I think the only metrics or the output you can get with evaluators are booleans and numbers. So let's start with that. Let's go to add a new test case. I'm gonna say, I'm gonna call this test case one. I'm gonna call this Tesla. The next one is test case two. We're gonna call this Apple. And then I'm gonna call this Microsoft. I'm just gonna put a couple of fun companies. And the next one will be Uber, and then Alphabet. Right. Let's just add one non-tech company, so we can do something like Barclays, right? So that's a bank. I'm gonna hit save. So these are test cases. Now there's no evaluators on this, so let's see what happens when I run an evaluation suite. I'm not expecting anything to really build, but we can look at the build as it's happening now. What I want to do now is edit these tests and add an evaluator. So what I want to check is a string length, right? So I want to see how long. So we want a function output, and we want to see the string length from each of them. So that's just using one of the default evaluators that we have out of the box. We can add more evaluators, right? So I'm just going to save that. And I'm going to run, I'm going to run the evaluation suite again. Let's see this one. Okay, so this, even without putting any evaluation, what we're able to get was information about the duration and the compute time. Interesting. And we can hit debug to debug that specific test case. We're able to understand the user, the system, and the output. These are the user inputs. So that's great. I've run another one, and let's see what that's about. Right. So we get the default ones, the duration and the compute, but we also get the string length, which is interesting. Now, one of the things I want to do is that we can evaluate them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare this to another run. So I'm going to just run this one more time, and then we're just going to compare two different evaluation test suites that were run. Basically, I didn't add anything different, but we're just going to kind of like check if there's anything that happened differently. So I'm just going to compare this latest one to the one just before that. And you can start to see very interestingly, that obviously there's some difference. Um, in some cases the string length in these ones, yeah, some cases the string length is bigger, some cases it's smaller. Interesting for Barclays to give the exact same thing, so that's an interesting one. Uh, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just compare it against the very first one. Or maybe what I'm gonna do actually is I'm gonna change this to not from GPT-4o to Claude, and I'm gonna run this again, and then we're gonna compare GPT-4o to Claude. So I think that's kind of like one of the ways that you can test different LLM functions. But let's see how that goes. I'm gonna pause. Now that's done running, I'm gonna just compare them. You'd see if I compare to the previous one. So this is with Claude, and then this is with GPT-4. One of the things we start to see very quickly is the compute time. Right, so Claude is taking a lot more time, right, than GPT-4. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to change the completion strategy to single completion. I'm going to run it again on Claude and see what we're getting. Interesting. So that run seemed a bit faster. I'm going to compare that against GPT-4. Right, brilliant. And we're already seeing that the duration still is longer than GPT-4, even with single completion. It's interesting. Okay, so let's come out of here. One of the things I want to do is explore the logic itself. We want to explore the evaluation suite rather. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here. So we can just close this run. I'm going to leave the documentation open. But what we want to do is go back to the overview here. And we want to understand a bit more on the evaluation suite. So these are aggregate metrics. I'm just going to refresh this to see if it and you can already see for the duration. So these are the different metrics that we're getting from our suite. We've got duration, we've got compute time. It doesn't look like the results from the evaluators are showing up in this view. So let's see. If I switch between that baseline and comparison, we see that the duration is taking a bit more time. This took 7.9 seconds. Now, how do I determine what the base is? So one baseline report. So the baseline is the first one. You can see 1051 is the first one. And then we can compare that with, let's say, the most recent one. And we're already seeing, we need to understand what this test index is. But we're already seeing that we have, against the baseline, let's maybe just compare it here. We're having the baseline happen a lot more within the 4 to 5 second, 5 to 6 second range. Because how many, can't remember, I think we had how many tests? We had a couple of them. And then the same with the compute. Oh, we now have string length here, which is good. With the initial baseline, we don't have any string length. So let's see. So the baseline, maybe let's compare it. Right, so that's where we had initial baseline. And we're already seeing that the string length lies a lot more on this side, right? So that's good to see. We have string length, we have compute time, we have duration all here. Now if we look at the view test, we can also, so this basically helps us to see the tests, 1, 2, 3, up to 6 tests, six tests exactly. And then we can basically see, right, and I can filter here. So that's good to know. And I'm going to pause it here. So this is a result of our evaluation suite. One of the things I want to do is actually look at the eval itself. I think there are some other metrics that we could see with the eval, right? So this is the only evaluator, additional evaluator that we have. We can run different tests, and we can look at that. If we're not comparing, we can look at different tests, and then we can see if they all passed. And this is kind of like where we understand what has been set up. We're not running any history to data set. So all of that makes sense. Okay, cool. I'm going to pause here and upload this.